Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Joe Sidoti here, and today we're going to be talking about bass guitar and how to use an amp sim to get a killer bass tone with attitude and grit. And stay tuned to the end because I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to get a similar sound even if you don't have an amp simulator plugin. So let's get into it right now. All right, so you've tracked bass guitar with a DI, and it sounds okay, but you're looking for that extra push over the cliff to go to 11. So let's talk about some ways that we can accomplish this. The first way is to use an amp sim. Now, an amp sim or simulator can be a great way to get your bass to really sound great and to sit well in the mix. Now, in this video, I'm going to show you which plugin I typically use, but honestly, most of the amp sims out there nowadays are pretty good. So you'll probably be fine with what you have, so don't feel like you have to go run out and buy a new plugin just because you saw, what I use. But stay tuned again till the end because if you don't have one, I'm going to show you some other ways that you can get similar results. But before we dive into the computer, let's talk about some basics when it comes to bass amps and some pitfalls that you want to avoid, specifically when you're blending a bass amp with a DI. One thing you need to pay attention to closely is the phase alignment between the bass amp and the DI. Because the time it takes for the bass to get into the DI and then into your computer is totally different than the time it takes to get from your bass into the head of the amplifier, out of that into the speaker, out of the speaker into the mic, out of the mic into the mic pre and into your computer. So that time difference needs to be locked in, otherwise you're going to have phase cancellation on anything that's going to be 180 degrees out. So let's take a close look at what these waveforms should look like and what the bass should sound like when your phase is in alignment. Okay, here we are back in the old tool of the pros. I'm just going to show you kind of what I'm talking about with the phase alignment. If you zoom in, you'll be able to see the positive and the negative of the waveform. And you have to zoom in pretty far. But so before we do that, this is the original bass DI track. Then I've got an amp simulator on this one, and then I've committed it to here. Then I've got the CLA bass plugin, which we're going to talk about later, and the commitment here, and then I've got the sansamp and its commitment here. So that's what we're going to be covering. But first, like I mentioned, let's talk about the phase. So if I zoom in here, I'm using my keyboard, sorry. I chose this note as a good place to see the waveform. This here is the original bass DI track, and this is it duplicated where I have the plugin. So obviously those are identical. And then here is the bass amp after it's been committed or rendered or whatever you want to call it. So this is what you're looking for. If I draw this line here right through, see the first is it goes down and then it goes up, then it goes up, then it goes down. So this is the waveform. Now, when I draw that line, those both are in sync because they're identical. And now here is my bass amp. So they're pretty well in sync. If I were to select this track and nudge it 1 millisecond to the left, it's about the same far off as it is when it was here. Now, if you look, I actually had to nudge it a little bit to make it line up. So that's all I'm saying is be careful of that. You might have to nudge it a little bit. And that's all you're looking for. You're looking for when the original goes up, the faux amp goes up, and vice versa. When they goes down, they go down. That means they're in phase. 180 degrees this way, 180 degrees this way, 180 degrees this way, 180 degrees that way. So what does that look like? Well, let's just do this real quick so you can see. And let's invert and render. Boom. When this one is going down, this one is going up. So that would be out of phase. And then you'd have all sorts of weird cancellations anywhere those notes are exactly 180 degrees out of phase. So I just say this to look out for it. It's something you need to make sure is right. That's all. Sometimes it's not an issue. You just got to check for it. Okay. Now that we've covered the techie stuff, let's get into the fun stuff. I'm going to zoom back out here, and we're going to just work on how to get a killer gritty bass tone. This is specifically kind of a rock vibe, and the song that I chose has got a bass guitar that was tracked as a DI only, and honestly it's a 5-string, and there's a whole lot of low notes, and so it's very bottom end heavy, very, very scooped in the mids. You can't hardly hear anything there. And so it needs some of that drive. Now, remember, I do have a video on how to hear bass through small speakers. So I cover a lot of the reasons why mids are so important in the bass. And I'll put a link in the description, and I'll put one up on the screen. Is it right there? I think it's right there. No. Is it there? Crap. I don't know. I'll put it on the screen. Okay. And let's take a listen to this bass DI by itself. Okay, it's kind of just a pulsing thing. Let's get here. There you have it. Slapper the bass, man. No, he's not really slapping. It's a big, warm, deep bass sound. And by itself, it might be fine, but you're talking about having to get this thing in the mix with a whole bunch of drums, guitars, and things like that, and it's going to be tough to hear. So with everything else muted and just the DI, let's play a little bit of this song, and let's see how it sounds with just the DI. Ooh, reverb. So that's what it sounds like. I mean, it's there, it's warm, but it's not aggressive. It's just kind of going to hold in the bottom end a little bit, so it's not really exciting. So that's where we start bringing in things. Now, again, you don't have to go out and get this plugin. There's all sorts of ways, and we're going to cover some other ways. But here's what I am using to create a bass amp simulation, a faux amp. I really like Amplitude because they really go the distance to have pedals, to have what kind of amp, what kind of speaker, what kind of room it's in, what kind of microphones, where they're placed, you know, and then even rack gear where you can insert effects as if you had a rack. So it's really thought through. So this is just the one that comes with the 4. You don't have to upgrade to the fancy packages to get all the stuff. I'm going to say something that is unpopular. Are you ready? I don't like tube bass amps. I like solid state bass amps. The tube bass amps kind of just sound flubby to me, and they just aren't tight and quick. They sound spongy to me. I tend to like a solid state bass amp. So that's what I'm using, is this little deal here, okay? And then I've got the stomp pedal. So I've got chorus, and I've got some more distortion. Then on the amp side itself, I'm driving the gain hot enough so that it kind of distorts. Nothing on the inserts. And then the cab, I'm using a vintage SVX 810 with a Sennheiser 441. I don't like to use kick drum mics when I'm miking a bass amp. They tend to have a big scoop in the mids, and that's exactly what I don't want when I'm miking the bass cab. So 57, Sennheiser 421, 441, RE20, those are the kind of mics that I'll typically use. And the 441 just happens to be one of my favorite bass drum mics, as well as one of my favorite kick drum mics. That's a whole nother story. This thing is really, really awesome. It is great for vocals. It is great for bass, guitar, you name it. It's just a really nice, smooth mic. Anyways, that is what I've got. So let's listen to just the amplitude bass amp here and see what I've done. Okay, it's really mid-rangey, it's got chorus, it's kind of weird sounding, but when you blend this mid-rangey, kind of distorted, kind of whatever with the DI, that's when the magic starts happening. So let's see, I'm going to use my fader here, and I'm going to lower the 2, just because once you combine them together, obviously they're going to get way louder. And let's listen to both. Now it sounds a little bit more like a whole complete picture to me. Let's see what that sounds like together in the mix. And then I'm going to turn off the amp, and then I'll turn the amp back on so you can hear the difference with just the DI and the DI and the amp. Let's start it, let's find a different spot. Let's start it here. So we're going to start with just the DI. All the things you say you're living by. You say there's a better way, but I'm okay. I'm dying anyways. It's pretty obvious that without that mid-rangey distorted bass amp, I mean, you're really fighting to hear the bass. And then what ends up happening is you got to crank up that DI bass, and it's got so much more bottom end that you're now having a hard time balancing all the thing. So rather than really, you know, do surgery on the DI, just fill in what's missing, which is the mid-range. So that's what I did. Okay, so now that we've kind of got that set, let's move on to some other options of what you can do if you don't have an amp simulator. Which, by the way, before we jump forward, this is that amp committed. So this is what it looks like. So in a typical mix, I would duplicate the bass DI, put the amp on it. Once I'm happy with it, I just commit and render it out, which another video I have is on committing. It's making a decision and just committing to it. So I'll link to that as well in the description. So normally then I would hide this and move on. So let's go with the next thing. So I've got the CLA bass. So let's hear what that sounds like by itself. We know what the DI sounds like. We'll listen to the same spot. This is a good spot. I mean, that's attitude for days. And look, I mean, CLA is no slump, right? I mean, the guy knows what sounds good. Chorus, distortion. I've got it on the lowest setting, growl, but there's rip and roar and, you know, it just gets more over the top, you know, a little more metal. This is a feature here that's of part of this plugin is to allow the sub frequencies to come through or not. And if it's on, there's just like no high pass. And if it's off, it's like there's a subtle high pass. So in this case, the way it sounded with the DI, I left it off because the DI has plenty of bottom end and I didn't need to add more to it. A little bit of compression here, and then the honk EQ. I'm adding lots of honk. That's mid-range. And that's it. And then I just balanced the level. So here's what that sounds like with the bass DI. Let's hear that in context with the song. And I will do the same thing. I will turn on and off the CLA bass. So we'll start with it off. So again, a lot of similarities to what the amp does, just a slightly different flavor. And then again, I would commit that out, and here it is. Because the chorus of this plugin is stereo, it renders it out as stereo. Same thing with the amp here. That's why it's going from mono to stereo, by the way. And that's fine. I tend to leave the chorus stereo, even though bass is, for the most part, you know, not a stereo instrument, obviously. But if that chorus can move a little bit, it really gives some nice movement and some sexiness to it. Okay, moving on to the sansamp. Let's bring that up, and you can see, now this comes free with Pro Tools, by the way. So this is a completely free option. There are some presets, and I recalled one called Crunchy Bass, and then I just kind of tweaked it from there. So let me show you what that sounds like soloed. Okay, again, it's mid-rangey, distorted, And then when we put that together with the DI, here's what it sounds like together. And in context with the song, we'll do the same thing. I will turn on here. We'll start with it muted, and then I'll turn it on. All the things you say you're living by. You say there's a better way, but I'm okay. I'm dying anyways. I mean, to me, this is just what is needed for this song to get an aggressive, gritty bass sound. Is you've got to kind of have an amp simulation, a mid-range distortion, and add it. What I like to do is to duplicate the original bass, and so that I'm never like completely destroying the purity of the DI, because the DI really sounds good. It's just not everything that needs to be in the song. And rather than try and finagle that into something it's not, I let it be what it is, and I duplicate it and finagle that into something it's not, and I blend it in subtly. And I think that's the best way to go about it. I think that's it. Cool. Well, that's pretty much it, guys, for this video. I really appreciate your time and watching till the end. I hope that you got something out of this. If you did, please press that like button, the little thumbs up. It really helps out, and subscribe to the channel. 79% of you viewers are not subscribed, and it really helps get my videos seen by more people. So again, do that. It really helps. And as always, leave a comment below. Let me know if you're digging what I'm putting out. And if you have any ideas for future videos, leave a comment below and I'll be happy to oblige. All right, guys, again, thanks so much, and we'll see you on the flip flop.